Fifth Hour Radio Show.
Jason, I'm going to start off by asking you how you got into the field of research that you're in. You know, was it something that that interested you as a kid, or is it something you just gradually fell into?
Well, you know, I'm 39 now, and when I was around 21, still in college, someone had mentioned to me that there was a face and pyramids on the surface of Mars imaged by NASA probes. And I was very skeptical for this information and decided to look into it on my own, and found out while attending college in San Diego that there's a company called Malin Space Science Systems located also in San Diego. And this happens to be the principal contractor for NASA, Dr. Mike Malin of Malin Space Science Systems. And he pretty much puts all of the various cameras on the probes we've been sending to Mars. So all of the imagery that we get through NASA of the various surface images are being processed by Dr. Mike Malin's cameras. So as a layman, as a college student, I called Dr. Mike Malin and I said, wow, is there any possibility that these face and pyramids are artificial? And he said, no, these are sand and weather-eroded objects, completely human intelligence intervention. And that's what really started to raise my eyebrows and go, well, I'm trying to figure out things on another planet, Mars, but here on our own planet, I see things that are pyramids and large stone megalithic monuments that predate our known history and we can't explain. So that's kind of what really kickstarted my interest into looking into where do we really come from.
Now, you actually took that image and split it in half at one time, didn't you? The Sidonia image of the ruins. I was watching one of your lectures.
No, thank you, Rob. You're correct. Yes, please.
When you took that image and you put it side by side where you symmetrically split it directly in half, what did you observe?
Well, basically, for your audience, what I did was over the last decade, NASA has actually photographed a certain region on the surface of Mars called Sidonia. And lo and behold, there is a 1.5 mile long monument over 700 meters high, which looks like a human face. And so over the last decade, they've imaged it several times. What's interesting about this is as the camera technology has improved over the decade, the quality of the images of just that region have decreased in quality. So pretty much, Rob, what I did was I took the worst image that they provided publicly over that region, Sidonia, the face on Mars, and I did just what you said, which was I tilted it so as if you were looking at it head on, split it right down the middle, and mirrored the left as well as the right half. And in doing that, I revealed some mathematical symmetry, which there's just no probability that that's artificial.
Well, let me delve a little further here. One of the other things, not to get away too much from the ruins, but the actual images coming from Mars, people are kind of under a misconception that the planet is red, and you touched base on that, and I thought that was very, very interesting. Talking about the spectrum that we see it in, can you touch base on that a little bit?
Of course. Thanks for bringing that up, Rob. Yeah, it's kind of a nomenclature of Mars being with this red tint, and that just kind of stuck. But what's really going on is the surface cameras that we send to Mars are taking in a larger spectrum of light than what the human eye processes. And so what happens is those images that show a red tint, most people can take any image from NASA's website of Mars in the red tint, and if you open in Photoshop and just do a color correction for what your normal eye would see here on Earth, you can just say normalize under Photoshop. It literally turns the color of the skies to blue because it's filtering out a spectrum of light, red, which you wouldn't normally see through that lens if you were standing on the surface of Mars as a human using your eye rather than this sophisticated lens. So the simple answer is the skies of Mars are not red. They are much more blue, just like they are here on Earth. And there's been a lot of clear signs, and anyone can Google Mars and methane or Mars and plant life, that all the latest science is pointing to the fact that, there's life on Mars now. There's plants and things growing. I'm just waiting for them to scoop up a little animal or something. So, yeah.
Now, one of your claims to fame is the recreating of a working model of what is called the Baghdad Battery. You know, most people are taught that the battery was invented in the 1800s, but from what your research suggests, that we were using this technology almost 2,000 years ago. You know,
right. Well, you know, sorry to cut you off there, but in my excitement to answer you, yes, there's been a couple of artifacts dating back to around the 2500 BC range. So we're talking around 4,000 years old, and pretty much what we find is right around that time frame, we found two artifacts. One in the region of our modern-day Iraq, then called Mesopotamia, Babylon, and even previous to that, Sumer, but today's southern Iraq. They found about a dozen of what are simply a clay pot with an iron rod wrapped around some copper in the middle, and they found that these dozen or so small batteries are just that. If you fill it with a weak acidic acid, lime juice, lemon juice, wine, grape juice, anything like that, our science now can prove that these things we call the Baghdad Battery generate between 4 to 7 volts, and these are rather small. Now, in coinciding with that, in the same time period, 2500 BC, we find in Egypt wall reliefs that were in this one area of Dendera, Egypt. It shows Egyptians clearly holding up what a layman, without training, would say, wow, it looks like they're holding up large light bulbs, and they appear to be plugged into a type of device. And throughout Egypt, there are these similar reliefs of what appear to be these large clay pots, similar to these smaller versions in Iraq called the Baghdad Battery. So putting 2 to 2 together, it looks as if ancient Iraq, the ancient Egyptians, were using electricity as well as phosphorescence. You know, not only the electrical current, but actually generating light, physical light bulbs. And this is, of course, we're talking about 4,000 years ago. So pretty interesting stuff.
You know, as time has traveled forward, how much history has mankind lost, and how much of that history was shared with ancient astronauts visiting from other worlds?
You know, that's a really good question, Rob. And, you know, I'm on a show on the History Channel called Ancient Aliens. It's a great show. A lot of people always ask me, like, wow, man, you must really think the aliens built all the pyramids, huh? Actually, no. The interesting thing is that, you know, just like you said, are there lost epics of our, you know, cultures? Anyone can Google the term Plato's Great Year. We've heard terms thrown around like the Golden Age, the Dark Ages. Well, it turns out, Rob, that based on the zodiacal precession of the zodiac, meaning the heavens have been broken down into 12 constellations, the scorpion, the bull, all these various zodiacal symbols that we denote in our night sky. The reason why we have these 12 constellations is it's actually a large clock that tells us what epoch of time we're in. And this clock repeats. But this is a very new concept to us, Rob. And things like the Mayan calendar are part of this concept. Plato's Great Year is part of that concept. So what happens basically is we go through a very large cycle of change that lasts 24,000 years here on Earth. And in this 24,000-year cycle, we go into the Golden Age, and then we go into the Dark Ages and forget everything. And what my latest research has been showing me, based on other people that I agree with in this field, the reason why we have this large cycle of time is we are a binary solar system. And that simply means, Rob, that based on all the other solar systems that we've been imaging, external solar systems, not ours, it seems that they're all in an intricate dance with more than one sun, sometimes even up to 6, but very commonly having 2, binary. So all the evidence is stacking up that we're a binary solar system. We actually have 2 suns, but our second sun is a brown dwarf. It's failed. It's dark now, or it's so far in the distance it could possibly be another constellation like Sirius A and B. We don't know yet, but all the evidence is stacking up that we're binary, and the orbit of our 2 suns meaning our sun is orbiting around another sun, big heavy concept here. But as our sun is orbiting this other sun, all the little planets, meaning us, going around our sun, are moving through space. And so this large cycle of these two suns in orbit around each other seem to be what's causing the golden age and the dark ages. When the two suns are at their closest point in orbit, we're in the golden age. When the two suns are at their farthest point from each other, we're in the dark ages. I'll give you another analogy in a moment, but that's a very heavy concept which I'm now starting to introduce based on various influences I'm getting in my research.
You know, speaking of Ancient Aliens, which is one of my favorite TV shows, by the way, how did you even get involved with becoming a recurring guest on that show?
Well, pretty much, you know, it starts off with, you know, like I said, I started doing this research when I was 21, and there's no real diploma or school that I can go to become, you know, a PhD in these type of topics, you know, ancient astronaut theory and such. So what it really boils down to, Rob, is that I've just spent several years of funding research and being in the field and doing things where I've amassed enough information that has allowed me to become an expert in the field of Sumerian artifacts and various analysis of these various cultures, all having the same type of message, which is beings from the heavens came down and visited us, and today we call it mythology, but in looking at all these various cultures and their evidence, we can now take a scientific approach to say, wow, we see a similar pattern of them basically just mimicking what they saw and trying to recreate the technology without actually understanding it. So it really starts to raise a lot of questions as to why we have little airplane artifacts and various people in astronaut suits and monuments around the world that align mathematically to geodetic points on Earth, as well as star constellations in Earth, you know, above the Earth. For instance, like the Giza pyramids aligning with the Orion constellation at certain points in time. So it just starts to raise a lot of questions, Rob, as to how are all of these pieces of evidence around the world in existence without being blanketed by one specific religious view of Christianity or Buddhism or various things. When looking at it from a whole, they all are kind of telling the same message of contact that's taken place in our past. But it's, again, we're talking about a very large cycle of time here on Earth, a 24,000-year cycle that repeats. So we're really just starting to only get a glimpse of this larger spectrum.
Now, speaking of little planes, I was watching an episode of Ancient Aliens, and they were showing. Now, I don't know if it was, you know, ancient jewelry or like an idol or something. I forget, but it, you know, it looked like a space shuttle. And didn't someone actually make a working model of that actually flew?
Right. Well, yes. There's been several artifacts. You know, some of them in Central America and Mesoamerica that have been on display for many years as insect models. Golden insects. But under closer inspection, anyone with aeronautical proficiency can say, well, wait a minute. These don't look like insects. They look like modern planes. You know, 90-degree tail fin. The aerodynamics of the wings and the proportions of them are not intrinsic to a bird, but more intrinsic to a modern aircraft. And anyone can say that, again, even from a layman's perspective, by just looking at the simple analysis of these artifacts compared to our modern aircraft.
You talked about being in the field just moments ago. What does an expedition for ancient relics entail? How do you prepare for one of these trips?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question, Rob, because just recently I've been testing out some new equipment and kind of, you know, using social media to explain to people. What I've been doing is actually training myself on something called AR drone, which is just a very low-level programmable drone with an HD camera, essentially a glorified helicopter with sensors, which allows me to take this device into locations where maybe perhaps I can't get a helicopter and it's a large cliff that I don't want to scale, but I can take my small drone up there and film it and get the petroglyphs on the wall, which we just recently did in Hawaii. and be able to capture footage of things that I can't actually get to myself and can't send a large helicopter to go, but I can send my small drone, and using GPS sensors and barometric pressure, I can see and hear and capture footage that we then are going to, use for future expedition footage.
How hard is it to get to one of these sites? For instance, like Pumapunku or somewhere like that. I mean, can you just walk right up to it, or do you have to go through certain channels?
No, you can definitely, there are tourism for any of these well-known sites like Pumapunku or Machu Picchu or Teotihuacan. Some of the well-known places that are on the map, they're all part of modern tourism. And, of course, the locals welcome that because, obviously, that stimulates their economy. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, I hear a lot of things, Rob, about, theft and danger and such, like in Mexico and Egypt. I only hear this from the news. All of the people that are in the field, on the front lines in these locations, like blogging and sending pictures to Facebook, everything seems fine. Like they're cruising down the Nile, they're going up the pyramids. So there is a lot of overreaction in the media as far as the safety of tourism in locations like Egypt or like Mexico.
I don't want to throw this out talking about, aliens and stuff, but I have to. I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan or not, but do you think these ancient travelers do you think these ancient travelers had a prime directive, or did they just give us enough to move forward very slowly?
Well, I got to say, the latest Star Trek movie's opening 5-minute scene was dedicated specifically to the line of research that I specialize in, which is this ancient Nibiru, mm-hmm. which was talked about the most primitive culture. It was talked about by the most primitive culture, which comes out of southern Iraq. And so, for me, yes, I find the Star Trek analogy, to answer your question, a very interesting one. Do we have a prime directive? I would almost reverse it, Rob, in saying that if there is a galactic federation of planets or these, collective smart alien races out there collaborating, they look at us on Earth and see us blowing up each other, expelling natural resources, pretty much being infantiles. I don't think they're going to welcome us into the Galactic Federation at this point. To me, Rob, my personal opinion, I think Earth is on quarantine. The reason why we don't see open contact and only classified stories come out about UFOs, governments working with aliens underground and in secret bases, well, I'll tell you what, if any of that stuff does exist, for them to stay cloaked from the general population, it's probably not that big of a deal. Because for whatever reason, we are on quarantine. We are getting slowly pushed in the right direction to say, hey guys, clean up your act, get it together, and then there's a lot more possibilities for our human race and interaction. To be honest with you, Rob, I think it all relates to a bigger plan of this cycle of time, as I alluded to earlier, this great year, Plato's great year. There really is just a series of events where, as we go into the golden age and then into the dark ages, we're just coming out of the dark ages. So aliens or anyone of a higher intelligence is looking at us right now going, well, let's just give them a few more 1,000 years. And then we'll probably be a lot more interesting to talk to.
Just kind of tracking backwards here a little bit, what would have been a reason for them to come here in the first place other than exploration? I mean, did they find us, or do you think they might have put us here?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, Rob. The evidence is, in looking at that, says that if we look at the fact that the anthropological bone record and trying to figure out, are we connected to Neanderthals and where do we come from, all of the evidence suggests that there's this, this intervention, which we call the missing link. The normal evolution here on Earth, somehow this ape man, this hominoid that was evolving naturally, somehow magic intervened, and now we're here. Mm-hmm. So the only answer is that explains that is, the newest science is saying that something happened in southern Africa. Our genes all of a sudden instantly changed and became from a hominid into us. We don't know what the answer is, Rob, but that's the fun part of this challenge is all of the evidence is starting to point to the fact that we have had visitation. There has been this intervention, but it's a very complex story. It's not black and white. And so now we're starting to study these nuances in shows like Ancient Aliens and various other things that are coming out in the media.
We're getting close on time, but I got to ask you, we had some listeners write in, and they wanted to ask you a few questions. One of them is, what are your thoughts on the aliens visiting our planet being none other than us in the future? Could that be a possibility?
Yes, I think it's very possible that time travel is a very interesting topic, and it's hard to answer other than saying that there's a book out there called The Day After Roswell by Philip Corso Jr., The Day After Roswell, and it actually talks about the Roswell crash actually being not a spacecraft, but a time travel device. And this is really going to blow your hair back. But pretty much what we've been doing over the last 60 years is we reverse engineered this time travel device several different times now. We've reverse engineered it, learned a little bit more, and we sent it back to the time of when we discovered the crash with a little bit easier technology each time for us to rediscover it and learn faster. And supposedly they've done that several times. And they actually have perfected time travel and are using it. Like, why don't we ever see a nuclear bomb detonated or a UFO or something like that hovering over Beverly Hills? Maybe it's because if anything ever did happen, they could quickly go back in time and erase it. I'm not saying that that's the truth, but there is significant research on that topic, The Day After Roswell by Philip Corso Jr. So that's a great question.
That's real deep right there.
Yeah,
what about this one? What's Jason's favorite piece of evidence that in his mind proves the existence of life on other than Earth?
Well, I think it's really, for me, at this point in time, the fact that all of these ancient cultures around the world seem to be aware of this larger cycle of time. They've built monuments as astronomical markers here on Earth that line up to these constellations as we loop through this large cycle of time. These alignments take place again and again, but they happen over thousands of years. Why? So for me, that's the most interesting topic I'm looking into now, is trying to figure out, why did they create all these alignments? At this point, I think it's to pinpoint at what point they were alive in the cycle. Were they just coming out of the Dark Ages? Were they in the Golden Age? Were they just coming out of the Golden Age? It's like a grand cycle, a large clock of time. So this is a very interesting topic for me, as to understanding why these ancient cultures built these monuments around the Earth and align them to various constellations in the sky.
Last question. Have you ever seen a UFO?
Yes, I have. When I was 20 years old, before I actually began doing my research at 21, as a college student, one night I actually saw something fly over the whole horizontal view of the night sky just as the sun was setting. And, it's like if you stare at something long enough in the sky, it either will coalesce in your mind as a bird or a balloon or a helicopter. Nothing ever clicked watching this object. So that was one of the pivotal events for me, that questions started to arise as to, well, what was that? What could this be? And I literally had no interest before that in these type of topics. So who knows? I'd sure love to have a closer encounter under the right safe conditions, obviously, not at night in the middle of my bedroom, not in the middle of the night in my bedroom or anything. So, just FYI.
Yeah. Jason, man, thanks for taking time out of your day and joining us on the show.
Thank you, Rob.
Hey, before we go, though, can you tell our listeners where they can go as far as social media, websites, or anything like that to get more information about your research?
Of course. You can always just Google Jason Martell, and my main website is xfacts.com. That's a fact as in something that's true, and just put an X in front of it, so xfacts.com. Thanks a lot, Rob.
Hey, Jason, you have a nice night.
25th Hour Radio Show.